Dust pressed against the wide horizon like an old memory refusing to fade, and the Boone ranch stood quiet as a tomb. The boards of the porch groaned in the wind, and a lean figure sat there with his hat tilted low, eyes fixed on nothing in particular. Elias Boone had long grown used to the kind of silence that makes a man feel hollow inside. He worked cattle, mended fences, boiled his beans, and slept in a bed that had grown too big for him. The notice he'd nailed to the town post, "Cook wanted, honest pay, must tolerate silence," was less a plea and more a hope whispered into the void. What he got instead arrived at dusk, walking barefoot across the hard-pan earth, dust sticking to her ankles like chains. She was small, not fragile exactly, but worn thin by the road. Her dress hung heavy with the weight of travel, the hem torn ragged, and in front of her she carried a belly swollen with child. No horse, no shoes, just a face weathered by youth gone hard and eyes that didn't know how to bow. Elias straightened, his hand twitching toward his hat brim, as if politeness still had a place between strangers. "Can I help you, ma'am?" The words came out gruff, rusty with disuse. She looked at the porch, at the house, then at him. "Saw your notice," she said, her voice dry as tinder. "You said you needed a cook." Elias frowned. This was not the answer he expected. He had pictured a stout widow with strong arms, not a girl with dust for shoes, and a baby nearly ready to come into the world. "You ain't here for that." "I can try." Her jaw was set firm, though her shoulders sagged from exhaustion. She stood there trembling, not asking, not pleading. "I'll work. I just need a roof for now." He studied her in the fading light. Every instinct told him to send her away. He had no use for another mouth to feed, no patience for scandal or whispers that might come trailing after. But then his gaze caught on her feet, blistered raw, streaked with blood where gravel had cut skin. Something shifted inside him, a pang he'd buried years ago when he decided the world had nothing left to give him. "I can't," he muttered, turning toward the door. "I asked for a cook, not—" He trailed off, unable to finish. She drew herself upright, though her knees wavered. "Don't think I came begging. I can sweep, I can clean, I can fetch water till my back breaks. Just don't send me back out there tonight." The wind caught the screen door and rattled it against its hinges. Elias stood in the half-light of his doorway, torn between pride and shame. He wanted his solitude. He wanted the world to leave him as it had found him, empty, untethered, silent. But her eyes carried the same kind of silence he knew too well. Only hers was edged with fear. Finally, he sighed, long and low. "One night," he said. "That's all. Tomorrow you move on." She nodded once, stiffly, then stepped past him. Inside, the house seemed to hold its breath. Her presence filled it different than dust or wind ever had. He sat in his chair after, staring into the fire, hearing the creak of floorboards where she moved in the back room. Sleep came hard. Every sound reminded him that the house was no longer just his. The clink of a pail, the uneven rhythm of her steps, the faint murmur of her breathing, all of it gnawed at him. He told himself it was just for a night. Just one. But dawn broke cruel, spilling light across the yard as she tried to carry a bucket from a well. Her legs gave out. The bucket tipped, water spilling dark into the dirt. Elias was at her side before his mind caught up with his body, catching her arm as she collapsed. Her face was pale, lips cracked, her hand clutching her belly as though holding life itself in place. He cursed under his breath, looking at the empty road stretching toward town, at the wasted strength in her frame. There was no chance she'd survive walking on. Sending her away now would be the same as handing her to the grave. For a long moment he just knelt there, hands rough against her trembling shoulder. Then he let out a low growl that wasn't anger so much as surrender. "Guess the house just got louder," he muttered. Her eyes fluttered open, a flicker of relief passing through them. And though neither spoke more, the bargain had already been struck. The lonely rancher and the barefoot girl, bound not by choice but by necessity, standing on the thin edge of survival with nothing but silence and the unborn child between them. The day settled into an uneasy rhythm, like two mismatched horses pulling the same plow. Elias rose before dawn, as always, the sound of his boots against the wooden floor carrying through the house. May would already be stirring in the kitchen, fumbling with iron pots she didn't yet know how to master. The first morning, she burned the biscuits black as coal. The second, she drowned the beans in salt. Elias ate it all without a word, chewing slow, swallowing grit and brine as though it were nothing new. May watched him from across the table, searching for mockery, but finding only silence. He never praised, never scolded, just took what she offered and carried on. That silence was its own burden, heavier than words could be, yet there was something steady in it too, something that kept her spine straight. She tried to repay the roof over her head by mending his worn shirts, scrubbing the grime from his floorboards, and chasing after his stubborn chickens. Her belly made her clumsy, but she pushed herself until her hands cracked from the wash water. Elias noticed the blood on her knuckles once and muttered something about softening the lie. She only nodded, biting back tears, both from the sting and from the way his words came not as reproach but as quiet instruction, almost care. One evening, after weeks of this half-life together, Elias disappeared into the barn with scraps of leather. May thought nothing of it until next morning, when she found a pair of boots by her bed, patched together from his old tack, rough but sturdy, size to her feet. She pressed her palm against them, the leather still warm from his hands, and for the first time in months she cried without shame. When they ventured into town for supplies, the air changed. May felt it before she heard it. The whispers that slid like knives through the street. Women peered from behind parasols, men from under their hats. That girl, heavy with another man's child. And Boone took her in. Elias said nothing, his expression a stone mask, but May's cheeks burned hot as coals. Her fingers curled into her skirt, fighting the urge to run. Inside the mercantile, the stairs thickened. She could barely breathe. When she reached for a sack of flour, her hand shook so badly she nearly dropped it. And then Elias was there, stepping forward, his broad frame blocking the view of prying eyes. He didn't look at her, didn't say a word, just stood between her and the world, silent as a shield. She carried that silence back home, tucked it away like a secret kindness she could never repay. Nights brought their own fragile moments. May often woke with the child inside her kicking, fierce and restless. Once, Elias found her bent double near the hearth, clutching her belly with tears streaming down her face. He froze in the doorway, awkward as a man caught trespassing in another's sorrow. Then, with slow, clumsy steps, he crossed the room and knelt beside her. His rough hand hovered, uncertain, before settling near hers. The baby thumped hard against her skin. Elias whispered, barely more than a breath, "He's strong." The words trembled, as though they startled even him. May looked at him through wet lashes and saw a crack in his armor, something tender, hidden beneath years of dust and loneliness. Another evening, as the sun slipped down red and tired, May scrubbed laundry outside, humming a tune her mother once sang to her. The melody carried through the still air, soft and broken, but alive. Elias, hammering a fence post nearby, paused mid-swing. He leaned on the handle, listening as though the sound reached into places he thought long dead. He didn't move until the song ended, and even then his shoulders seemed heavier, like he was carrying a memory too fragile to touch. A storm rolled in one night, sudden and fierce. The roof leaked. The wind clawed at the windows. They sat close to the fire while rain battered the house. The thunder made May flinch, but she kept her eyes forward, her hands folded tight. At last, she spoke, voice trembling. "He left me with nothing, not even shoes." The words fell heavy in the room, a confession dragged from a marrow. Elias stared into the flames, jaw clenched. He gave no answer, but in the morning, when she found those boots at her bedside, she understood. The days lengthened, each one weaving them tighter together, though neither admitted it. May's steps grew slower, her breath shorter as the baby pressed hard against her ribs. Elias began doing the heavier chores without asking, leaving her to softer tasks. Sometimes their hands brushed when passing dishes, or their shoulders touched in the doorway, and time seemed to hold its breath. One dusk, after supper, Elias sat at the table long after his plate was empty. He turned his hat slowly in his hands, eyes fixed on the wood grain as though it held secrets. Finally he spoke, his voice low, rough as gravel. "This house ain't mine alone no more. Guess it never was meant to be." May froze, the words striking deeper than any declaration. She wanted to answer, to thank him, to tell him how those walls no longer felt like a stranger's prison, but a place where her heart could rest. But the moment was too delicate, like a bird perched on her windowsill. Speak too loud and it might fly away. So she only nodded, her fingers resting lightly on the swell of her belly. The fire crackled between them, and for the first time, the silence felt less like loneliness and more like the beginning of something neither dared to name. The sun hung heavy and merciless the afternoon May doubled over in the yard, the wash slipping from her hands. Elias saw her stagger, her face pale as paper, her breath caught sharp in her throat. He was at her side in a heartbeat, though his heart thundered like hooves against dry earth. Her cry tore through the stillness, a sound that had no place in his quiet world, a sound that ripped the ground out from under him. "Baby's coming," she gasped, clutching his shirt. Elias froze. All his years of mending fences and breaking horses had never prepared him for this. His hands shook as he lowered her inside, laying her down on the bed. The fear in her eyes cut him deeper than any blade. "Stay here," he muttered, as if she had the strength to rise. He tore out the door, saddle creaking under him as he kicked his horse hard toward town. Dust flew behind him, the road a blur. He stormed into Mercantile, breathless, the whole town staring. "She's in labor," he barked, words spilling rough and desperate. The men at the counter snickered, and one said low, "Boone's got himself tangled in a mess ain't his." Elias's gaze turned to stone. He didn't waste words, just fixed him with a glare cold enough to silence the room. "Where's the midwife?" Mrs. Harper, gray-haired and sharp-eyed, stepped forward with her satchel. "Take me to her," she said, and that was the end of it. Back at the ranch, the world shrank to the sound of May's cries and the storm of her body fighting to bring life into the world. Elias knelt by her side, her hand clamped on his with strength that made his bones ache. Sweat poured down her face. Her lips cracked with whispered prayers. He muttered rough encouragements, words clumsy on his tongue. "You hold on. You're stronger than this land. Don't you let go." Hours passed like years. The room filled with firelight and the scent of iron, with silence broken by pain and the midwife's sharp instructions. Then at last a wail pierced the air, thin, shrill, alive. May collapsed back against the pillow, tears streaking her cheeks, her body trembling. Mrs. Harper placed a small bundle into Elias's hands. He stared down at the red-faced child, so small, fists balled tight, lungs screaming with new life. His hands dwarfed the boy, but he held him as though the slightest movement might break him. Something broke inside Elias instead, something old and rusted, cracking open like dry earth and rain. May reached weakly for the baby. Elias passed him into her arms, watching as she pressed her cheek to her son's head. She whispered, voice raw, "He's mine, he's all I have." Elias sat there beside her, silent, staring at the two of them, and for the first time in years, the house didn't feel like a tomb. It felt alive. Days later, he rode into town again, the baby swaddled against his chest, tiny head tucked beneath his chin. The whispers rose instantly, sharper now, hungrier. "That child ain't his. She trapped him." "Boone!" raising another man's mistake. Elias stopped in the middle of the street, his boots planted in the dust, the boy stirring softly against him. He turned slow, meeting every eye with that hard, measured look of his. His voice was low, steady as iron. "Don't matter whose blood he carries. He's mine now." The words cut through the air, leaving silence in their wake. No one dared laugh. No one dared question again. He turned and walked on, shoulders squared, the weight of judgment slipping from him like an old coat. That night, the ranch was quiet, the baby nestled in Elias's arms as he rocked gently by the fire. May lay nearby, half asleep, watching with weary eyes. Elias's lips moved, shaping something low and halting. A tune, the same lullaby May had once hummed while scrubbing laundry, now broken and rough in his voice, but steady all the same. The baby settled, soothed by a song sung off-key, but full of something truer than notes. May's eyes filled with tears. She didn't try to hide. "You never needed a cook, Elias," she whispered. "You needed us." He looked at her, at the woman who had come to his door barefoot and proud, carrying shame and fire in equal measure. And he smiled, rare, cracked, but real, the kind of smile that belongs to a man who has finally laid down his loneliness. Outside, the prairie stretched endless, the wind carrying away the last echoes of judgment, leaving only the sound of life within those four walls. And if you were to sit with a memory of it, years later, you'd hear the old voice of the land whispering. In the wide silence of plains, a lonely man found more than a cook, and a barefoot woman found more than a roof. Together, they prove the West don't measure family by blood, but by the hands that hold you when the world turns its back. Maybe that's all we're ever searching for out here. Not riches nor glory, but a place where shame can be buried, where dignity can bloom again, and where even the loneliest of hearts can finally rest.